Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Earful Tower, and hello, what's that? It's the end of lockdown, or at least it's the end of the first stage of lockdown. What that means, I'll give you the quick description of what that means before we get into today's podcast episode with the mayor of the Marais. What it means is we are allowed to leave the house without a permission slip. If you haven't been paying attention, until now, you had to sign a permission slip saying, I swear on my honor that I'm not going to go more than 1 kilometer from my house, whether it's for exercise, going to the shops, or going to the pharmacy. Now we don't need any papers, we don't need any app, we can go as far as we want, as long as it's within 100 kilometers of our home. There are a few things that are still the same. The cafes and restaurants aren't open for customers, they're typically doing takeaway, but life will change a lot for the individual people. And that's of today, from Monday. So I plan on going for a bit of an explore today while respecting social distancing, of course. But today you're going to hear a pretty interesting episode. I recorded it on Zoom with Ariel Weil, Monsieur le Maire, and we talked about what next. We talked about what's going to happen for people. We talked about how, especially the Marais, where he is the mayor, we talked about how that's going to change as we sort of come out of this deconfinement, more bike lanes, closing down roads, things like that. We talked about the lockdown, how he's been going through it, how Parisians have been acting. But we also talk about how the mayoral elections in Paris changed. You see, the lockdown happened right in the middle of their 2 stages of voting for Paris mayors. And just so you know, the way it works in Paris is every district has a mayor. So Ariel is the mayor of the 4th district, which is the Marais. And then one mayor who is the mayor of the whole city, which is Anne Hidalgo. So you'll hear from Ariel today. He's a friend of the show. He's been on a bunch of times. Enjoy the chat, and I'll be back at the end with a quick update. Oh yes, and thank you very much to everybody. I can officially announce that this show now has 1 million downloads, and that's also worth celebrating. Almost enough to play the trumpet music again. I just couldn't help myself. Here's my chat with the mayor. Monsieur le Maire, Ariel Weil, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. How are you?
I'm good, under the circumstances, as we say.
Right. I mean, the circumstances are something we're going to talk about in a second, but you and I both seem to have grown our hair out.
Yeah, hair dry. There's a big petition around my family and my friends for me to keep my hair long. So I don't know if I'm going to give in.
I think it's a good look. I think you'll get away with it. Let's talk a little bit about first I want to paint a picture. Can you tell me what it's like in the Marais right now, just as a resident of the Marais?
Well, the Marais has been, to be honest, this has been a tough crisis. And first of all, I want to extend my sympathy to all those that have suffered or suffered the loss. It is actually our case here, and I say we have lost neighbors and friends and members of our militants. So it's been a pretty hard time from that perspective. At the same time, people haven't been enjoying, despite all of the issues and the economic difficulties. People they cherish the silence. The silence is incredible in the Marais. It has been incredible. I think now we can feel that there's a little bit of economic life starting again. A few more cars, more people outside. But for weeks, the Marais was exceptionally quiet, with no visitors, with very few people outside. And there are certain things that people have enjoyed about it, and I think that's not just in the Marais, but here in particular, where there's so many tourists on a regular basis, right? And also people working here. I think the contrast has been one of the sharpest in Paris, right? In the heart of the center of Paris. I think this is one of the places where the contrast with the regular life was the sharpest. And some of to an extent, it wasn't all negative. And also the fact that we're so close to the Seine River and everyone has been boasting about the ducks that we saw and the geese and what have you, right? So we saw more animals. I have been spending half of my time here. I'd say about half of my time here on Zoom and other video or audio conferences, and the rest of my time outside, taking care of the city hall or other organizations that we help. But when I'm here, I'm generally, often as I can, I take my video calls on. Unfortunately, I don't have a balcony, but I do have a little square by my window where I can sit and take some of the sun. And I was myself quite impressed and happy when I heard some of the birds singing. Right.
Yeah.
So I think all the experience of working from home and having birds sing right close to us.
Yeah. It's been the same up in Montmartre. I didn't know there were any birds up here because there's very little green space where I live, and many different kinds of birds too, not just pigeons. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah. I wasn't talking about pigeons. There's not that much romantic about the pigeons, but we've had, I'm not so good about birds' names, but we've had, I don't know what it was. I can't say it. Yeah, I think I had a corbeau. How do you say corbeau again? I forgot.
Crow. It's a crow.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure it was a corbeau actually, but yeah. So the Marais was itself, as it is, beautiful, but quite empty. And I think some of the people I walk into have enjoyed that. Now, also, I think everywhere in Paris, perhaps a little bit more here. I don't know. There were a lot of people who have left Paris. There are fewer people than usually.
Before we go on to people moving away from the city, I just want to stick with that walking around in empty Marais. Can you just talk me through what that feels like? Like, I know it's different and quiet, but did it feel eerie? Was there a negative feeling to it, or was it just like a kind of new paradise?
Right. It's it's a mixture of both, right? So there were a few nights where I had to do things, or I had to go places as the mayor, and I came back and there was no one on the streets except, of course, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, about some of the homeless, many of whom we know very well. So sometimes I'd bump into them and would have long discussions, but I've sometimes walked around and there was no one, and sometimes, yes, it was a little bit eerie and not so nice. Mm-hmm. At times I was walking in nearly deserted streets, but I walked into neighbors and friends, and that was nice. And we felt like, we were happy to talk, of course, maintaining our distance, but that was nice because you felt like it was a little village again, right? With no tourists, with fewer people from the outside. There was a nice atmosphere of, being amongst ourselves, neighbors. So it was a mixture of both.
Where, can I ask, you don't have to give us your address, but whereabouts in the Marais do you live?
I'm right in the heart of Le Marais. I'm near the Sainte-Croix-de-la-Bretonnerie and Vieille-du-Temple, so right in the center.
That's nice. Okay, I'm just painting a picture in my head up here. Let's get on to something you just touched on briefly. The people that left the city. I heard reports of 20% of Parisians got out of here. As a mayor, what does that make you feel?
I have mixed feelings, but overall, I'm not so tough about that. I've heard some very tough judgments from people that they were spreading the epidemic around in France and taking it to places where it wasn't. Look, I know there people have small apartments. They many kids, and if they have a country house, if they have an aunt or an uncle that has a house, I can totally understand that people who have a house and have little kids would prefer to be in a garden at the countryside somewhere with kids rather than in a small apartment in Paris. So frankly, I'm exercising no judgment on that. I think people did what they had to do. I was a little bit shocked that so many people flocked the trains. I thought that was quite not smart. To be so promiscuous and on trains living in the town. But you have to remember that when the government decided on the lockdown, there was I think 24 or 48 hours for people to move, and if they moved during that period, which is allowed, if they took their car or moved somehow in a safe way, and they're not spreading the virus somewhere, then that's fine. I think there were a lot of reports about Parisians, or not Parisians, but about people moving to some of the islands off coast, and not behaving in a nice way, making parties and things like that were forbidden. I think that gave a very bad image to people moving away from Paris. But look, there are many good reasons to do that, and I'm exercising no judgment.
Sure.
In fact, I'll go even farther. I think to an extent they helped us have less of a dense city. So from that perspective, that's not so bad.
If I had a chateau out in the Loire Valley, I would have been there immediately.
Yeah. I wouldn't, but I don't have a castle. And even if I had, as a mayor, I couldn't have done that. But if I hadn't been the mayor, and that's a lot of conditions, I had a castle, then maybe both conditions applied.
So, speaking of being the mayor, what's happening? The elections were right in the middle of this thing, and there was a bit of criticism that the first round went ahead, I think, and then the second round was postponed, as I understand. How, what's the latest with that? What are we looking at here?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the elections to me were in a different age, in a different century. But if you remember correctly, they were just a day before the lockdown. So with hindsight, of course, it seems crazy to have held these elections. I think it didn't really strike me. I'm not saying, I told you, because I didn't have a view about that. Obviously, I didn't have as much information as perhaps some people had. And my first hint that things were really going bad was when the president was a Thursday night when he decided that he would shut down the schools. I must say it's a bit strange to have decided to shut down the schools on a Monday morning, but hold the elections the Sunday before that. But when it really felt awkward and weird was when the prime minister, on the eve of the elections, went on TV and said that he was immediately shutting down all of the trades and all of the cafes and restaurants and basically everything. That is when I think a lot of people felt awkward. And in fact, that's the reason. I think that's the main reason that we had such a low participation. We were down significantly, materially down in terms of election participation from other municipal elections. So I think there was this weird atmosphere. Now we as elected officials, we had nothing to do but hold them, right? From the moment government decided to maintain the elections, we did what we had to do, which is make sure that they were organized in a safe way. I think that's what we did. And from that perspective, I think we did well. We did as good as we could given these conditions. We organized the elections in an extremely short span of time. So it was a huge amount of effort on our part, on the part of the city, to organize these elections, mark the ground for people to keep their distance. And we did it. But with hindsight, of course, it sounds weird that we had to do that. And as far as when the election is going to take place, I think the government has indicated that they're waiting for a scientific report on whether or not the elections can be held. So I think my mind has been so far away from the elections now that I can't really, at this stage, consider that as one of our key tasks. I doubt sincerely right now that we're going to organize the elections in June.
One thing I've noticed is that despite it all, there are changes being made to Paris, maybe because of what's happening or as a way of the way the city's going to change. Like, for example, I've been seeing a lot of new bike lanes opening up. Is this something that's...
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are busy with that anyway, but it looks like you're doing it on steroids.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I laugh because, it's one of my good topics, but it's actually a key question. It's a key issue. It's not a light issue, because the key issue is this, right? As people go back to work, at a time when we still have to apply to be extremely cautious and safe and apply social distancing, as it's called in English. And I don't like that term so much. I don't like the social part of it. But let's say physical distances, right? As we go back to what some people start to go back to work, and clearly we are being told that to go back to normal life as much as possible. There's going to be a lot of more traffic on our streets. And the issue for us is, if everyone makes a decision on their own, they're going to take their cars, right? And that would be a disaster. would be a disaster for people because they would be locked in traffic. And it would be a disaster for most people who do not have a car, right? So from our perspective as city planners, what we have to do is we have to make sure that people can walk. That is the number one way that people move around in Paris is they're walking. And walking and biking. And so we have to make sure that people can safely walk or bike in town. And the issue, especially in the center of Paris, but that's true everywhere in such a dense city as Paris, is that in normal times, it's maybe hard enough. And we'd already tried and started massively to implement bike lanes, to make more space available away from cars and available to walk to pedestrians. But this crisis is making this even more urgent. And it's also, I think, creating a state of mind where people that were fierce opponents of pedestrianization, of more bike lanes, are now all turning into supporters of that. It's fascinating for us because a few weeks ago, still we were pushing these topics and meeting fierce resistance. I'm thinking about 2 years ago when we had these debates about the Seine being pedestrian, with so much opposition. And now everyone wants to do this throughout the world. I'm not talking about Paris or France. I'm talking about everywhere in the world. And to an extent, and that's a paradox, right? Because we've done it so much already that perhaps you could argue we need to do it less than some other big cities in the world. And you've seen, I think, maybe not Detroit, but Seattle, I think I've seen San Francisco, cities in the US that have closed off streets. New York has closed off streets to traffic, and they've devoted it to either pedestrians or bikes. And that's striking because they weren't as advanced as we were. So you could say, well, we don't have anything to do because we've so advanced. And that's true to an extent, but that's not true to the extent that we shouldn't do anything. Because I tell you, the next few weeks are going to be critical. And we need to make sure that people have enough space to walk. And in the Marais, where, as you know, some of our streets are date back to medieval times, and we have very small sidewalks, we have to make sure that people can walk. So I have been working with the city and trying to make sure that we block off some streets and limit them to just people living here or deliveries. And other streets, we want to use the parking slots to make the sidewalks bigger, right? Yeah. And obviously, there's that big decision on Rue de Rivoli, and it's striking because I was there today and yesterday, and they've started to mark the ground, and we were going to double up the space devoted to bikes. And my hope is this is going to provide the safe conditions for Parisians to move around in the town.
Do you think one day that a lot of the Marais might just become pedestrianized?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you go back to when we were in a campaign, that was our big decision. That was a big proposition with the mayor, with Ana Hidalgo, to make it pedestrian in a way that I explained, which is certainly not to prevent people living here or people working here from doing what they have to do. But the big idea has always been to cut down on transit traffic, right? People using the center of Paris as a smart way to go places, to go to other places, obviously, than the center of Paris. And that can't be, right? Because we're too narrow, we're too old, we're too precious to be used as a highway. It's, our streets are not made as highways. They don't look like highways. They're not highways. So they shouldn't be used as highways.
Well, that's what a lot of people were doing on the banks of the Seine. That road that you were talking about just before, right on the sort of south side of the Marais, people were just using that to get through. And it was those motorist organizations who were getting so furious because they all lived out in the suburbs, right?
Yeah, exactly. To an extent, we're now reliving the debates on whether the banks of the Seine should be devoted to a highway, an urban highway, which it was. And I'm on the side of people who've long considered that it was ridiculous to use the most precious, oldest, most beautiful, but perhaps more importantly, a place that's so important from an ecological point of view, right? As a highway. That did not make sense. That doesn't make sense. That still doesn't make sense, and that won't make sense in the future. So I think we have to continue to fight against pollution. But now is a time when this is taking a more acute importance, because now the issue is that we need to make sure that people can keep their distance. Of course, there's the issue of pollution still, because there have been some studies, I think, that point to the some sort of a connection or a correlation between pollution and the spread of the virus. So from that perspective, yeah, sure, we need to fight against pollution. That's one of the reasons we want to have those, what they call them, corona roads. People talk now about urban tactics or tactical urbanism.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I'm a big fan of the word. I prefer, I think, strategic rather than tactic, because I think, yes, tactic in the sense that we can do things faster now, and in a way that we can do things that we can revert if they don't work, or and that's certainly something that Paris is doing right now. But I like the strategic part of it, right? I think a lot of what we do is going to be here for a long time.
Well, what about on Monday, when everything gets back to normal? There's surely a fear that because the parks will be closed and everything, everyone's just going to go to the riverside and the Canal Saint-Martin. Is that a concern?
It's a concern that parks are not open. I think I'm one of those that think that we should open them in a cautious way. Obviously, what you don't want to do is you don't want to create a place where people gather together, right? You don't want to create the incentive or the opportunity for people to take risks and risk spreading the epidemic again. And we saw that in the last few days before the lockdown. But I think with the mayor of Paris, we've been proposing that there's a reopening of some of the parks, slowly, cautiously. But I don't see how you can return to normal, or it's not going to be a return to normal, by the way, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be a gradual and slow path to normal, but it's going to take weeks and months till there's anything is normal. Mm-hmm. And in that gradual return to normalcy, I think we need to have some breathing space for people. And as you say, if you don't open the parks, yes, it creates incentives for people to gather where it's possible. So I think we need more spaces. We need rules. We need people not to obviously eat in parks and stay there. And there's, I think, a bit of concern about little kids playing in the playgrounds. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't open parks, because people need to breathe. They need to walk outside. And if we organize the space in a safe way, then that's better than locking and shutting everything down.
How are things with Madame Anne Hidalgo? Is she well?
Yes, I actually saw her yesterday. I've been speaking to her, I think, every day. In fact, it's even a paradox in a sense that we mayors and deputy mayors of Paris and mayors of Paris have been talking to each other every day. We've Mayor Hidalgo and her first deputy, they've been organizing a daily call. And in the first few weeks, we were having it on Saturday. We're having it on holidays as well. So we spoke to each other every day, as we never did before. But because we were physically trying to stay remotely speaking to each other, that was very important. We were in an emergency. We still are in an emergency crisis. We've gone to now 3-4 times a week for those conference calls, video conference calls, where we discuss about every issue, right? Schools and public space and masks and tests and everything. We're exhausted from a crisis mode that's gone on for 2 months now. And you feel like at some point, as you said, it's going to return to normal and we can take our lives again, our old lives. But that's never going to happen. At least it's not going to happen in the next few weeks. In fact, if anything, those few new weeks ahead of us are more perilous than those in the back. So I think we feel like we've all been working in a crisis mode 24/7. And now we need to increase the pace, which sounds like, we're not sure we can.
Okay, Ariel, I've got one last question for you, and then I'll let you go, okay? When everything's totally back to normal, and I mean everything, what's something that you're very much looking forward to doing?
Well, frankly, I haven't even thought about this, but the one thing I would love to do is I would like to have a day of holiday. I can't remember the last day I had. I know over Christmas I did go away from Paris, took a few days away, but these were days when I just worked a little bit less, but I was connected all the time to my team and on the phone. So I don't know when I had a day without a phone, without my teams being on the phone with me. And that's one of the things I look up to, right? Yeah. But one day when I'm with the kids and doing nothing, not working.
That sounds like a nice thing to look forward to. I hope it happens soon. Thank you very much, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. That was Monsieur Ariel Weil, the Mayor of the Marais. My name's Oliver G. If you've enjoyed this show, there's plenty more like it. Typically, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And if you really like it, if you really, really like the show, I can tell you that it's brought to you by the Patreon supporters, people who pay a small monthly pledge in return for a heck of a lot of bonus content, including my audiobook, which is coming out every single day of the week. I'll leave you with that, patreon.com/The Earful Tower. Have a lovely week wherever you are. And as for me, I think I'm going to go out for a walk. A long walk. Au revoir.